With us now from the House of Representatives is Ron Paul, Republican from Texas. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Have you heard anything this week that would give you second thoughts about opposing a war against Iraq?
No, and I keep listening carefully and read everything I can get, and I see no new information. There's really nothing new, not only in the last 2 months. It's interesting that we've been talking seriously about this in 1 month, but I don't think there's anything new in the last 2 months or 2 years. And for that matter, maybe even 12 years. When Secretary Powell was before our committee, he was very clear to us that Saddam Hussein's military is very, very weak, and much weaker than it was when he was defeated 12 years ago. And that sort of goes by everybody, and they keep talking about presumptions. Maybe someday he's going to get something, and maybe someday he's going to do this, and he might build a weapon, and he is trying to get these things. So it's pretty vague accusations.
Have you seen or heard anything from the CIA, the Pentagon, the State Department, or the White House to suggest that Saddam Hussein is planning an attack on the United States?
No, I see nothing imminent. He doesn't have an Air Force. He doesn't have a Navy. And he can't even shoot down he didn't shoot one of our airplanes down in 12 years, and his army is 1/3 it was 12 years ago. So, you know, this fiction that he's Hitler and he's about to take over the Middle East I think it's a stretch.
Let's take for a moment the administration at its word and admit that President Bush and others really believe there's a potential threat if he gets serious weapons of mass destruction. What should we do about that if we really thought he was getting weapons of mass destruction?
Well, I think that President Kennedy gave us a pretty good idea of what we should do. He had to deal with some tough times. As a matter of fact, the various presidents had to deal with the Soviets. They had 50,000 nuclear warheads, and they had tremendous power, and they brought them 90 miles off our shore. And not once did we think that confrontation was a good idea. Matter of fact, we always stood strong, had a strong national defense. We worked on containment, and we even negotiated. So I would say if we were able to accomplish that with the Soviets, and we've been able to live with the Chinese and put up with so much danger in the world, we ought to be able to handle this guy that there's no evidence that he has these weapons, and that there's no imminent threat, and he hasn't committed an act of aggression. I would think that if we really wanted to, we could handle him the same way we handled the Soviets. So we won the Cold War.
Why are so many members of Congress lining up to want to go to war?
On our side, a lot of Republicans will come to me and they'll tell me that, you know, their mail's running strongly against the war. But, you know, I just can't go against my president. And I'm uncomfortable about that. I mean, I know President Bush, and he's from our state. And you know a lot about politics, and you know how that works. And I don't like that, but I still have an obligation to my own beliefs, my own convictions, my promises, and to the Constitution. So I have to do my best job in defending that position. But there is a temptation to want to go along and feel good about being part of the party and not resist. And I think it's interesting on the other side, the Democrats are, yeah, they're split. Now the best allies I have now for trying to avoid a war comes from the more liberal Democrats, which is sort of ironic, me being a conservative Republican. So there's more allies from there. But the leadership on the Republican side, and that's mixed. I think there's a lot of influence behind the scenes for this war dealing with oil interests, and this would influence both sides of the aisle. And as much as people don't like to admit it, I really think that Israel and our support for Israel has an influence in our overall policy.
Do you think do you think Israel wants us to take out Saddam Hussein so that Israel doesn't have to do it itself? Because Israel is threatened.
You know, that's an interesting question. I think they want to get rid of Saddam Hussein, and I can't blame them. And when Israel went in and took out that nuclear reactor in the early 1980s, actually, I was one of the very few Republicans that supported it. It's in their interest to deal with it. No, I don't think it's so much that Israel wants us to do their work for them. It's that we don't allow them to do their work for themselves. Because even Persian Gulf War may well have been better fought by Israel and moderate Arabs, and they could have taken care of Saddam Hussein a lot better than we did, because that war is still going on.
What are you hearing from your district? Your conservative district has sent you back to Congress year after year. Are your constituents prepared to go to war? Do they want to go to war?
I would say that I had well over 1,000 positive letters of support, and probably 6 or 8 negative. So I would say they strongly support my position. Do whatever you can to avoid the war.
You've been consistent in your conservative positions. You oppose abortion. You like low taxes. You want us back on the gold standard. What is your philosophical basis for opposing a war with Iraq?
Well, you know, the long historic definition of and it's actually a Christian definition of the just war influences me, that it has to be defensive, it has to be declared by the proper authorities, and you have to be willing to win the war, prompts me to look at what the founders said. And they want us to declare the war. The responsibility is on the House and the Senate to make the declaration, and that we should win it. Now, I get motivated by this because I'm old enough to remember World War II and all the other wars, and war is not good. And I know that since World War II we haven't won any wars, so the way we get into war is every bit as important as deciding whether or not to go to war. And it seems like when we slip into war through the back door, we're less likely to win, and the consequences seem to get out of control, and the complications last a lot longer. Just like Persian Gulf War we didn't finish it. We had a humiliating defeat in Vietnam. Korea, we still occupy Korea for 50 years. Besides, I think it's human nature to really prefer peace over war, and I think people will go to war when they know it's necessary. But I think if it's not necessary, they're very tempted to vote for somebody who advocates peace and a little bit more reasoning than to jump and leap into a war that may lead to some very serious consequences.